Hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion, mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Anque, and today we are continuing our series on The Last Winter. Today's faction we will be reviewing is the Nekrium Faction. If you haven't been paying attention to my previous videos, I do want to talk about how we will be evaluating the cards. To start off with, we're going to be looking at the 12, 18, 27 stat allocation model. This is best illustrated by the Combat Tactician. As you can see, at level 1 it has 12 points of stats, at level 2 it has 18 points of stats, and at level 3 you get 27 points of stats. Why is this important? Well, this helps us understand how the developers value an ability on a creature based on how far off the numbers are from this model. So if you have a creature at level 3 that has a significantly lower attack and health than a 13-14, it better have a really good ability to go with it. Additionally, when we're evaluating cards, we want to consider how the card functions on an empty board. Is it good in the early game, late game? Is it worth leveling? Is it good as an underdrop or an overdrop? And that kind of thing. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we will start off with the holistic or unforged creatures. The creatures that are coming back in The Last Winter are Blight Witch, Cacklebones, Coldheart Brute, Dissipating Spectre, Gloom Reaper Hag, Grimgaunt Predator, Portal Shade, and Spirit Reaver. But we want to talk about the new cards. So let's take a look at this banger, Caller of Souls. So Caller of Souls is an interesting card and the way it progresses. So at level 1, we have a 5/3 mage that has deploy, choose one, upgrade a 1 card in your hand, then discard it, or upgrade a 1 card in your discard pile. So it gets a little bit of the Aloyan treatment. It means that if it's your first card, if it's in your opening hand, it's not necessarily going to be dead on the first turn of the first cycle. At level 2, we get deploy, you may upgrade a card in your hand, then discard it. Then you may upgrade another card in your discard pile. So with this, you get to do both things. So you can take a level 1 card all the way up to level 3 in 1 card play. So that play is really nice with Krogius. But when we get to level 3, it goes nuts. So it reads, it's a 13 or a 3/13. Activate if you have 3 or more spirits in your banish pile. Destroy this to destroy all enemy creatures. So at first glance, at the first levels, it's not as noticeable, but this is a spirit payoff card. As long as you can get 3 spirits in your banish pile, by the time you drop this down, you have a one-sided board wipe. And along the way, you have a decently statted creature that will help you upgrade cards that you may have missed otherwise, especially since it can hit either your hand or your discard pile. In terms of stats, you're looking at a 4-point, 6-point, and 11-point stat penalty. At the 3rd level, you probably don't care that much because the best way to use it is going to be to play. Most of the time, the best way to use it is going to be playing it as your second action in a turn and immediately using it to destroy all of your opponent's creatures. Generally, I don't recommend playing this and waiting to give your opponent a chance to interact with it. However, if you do play it and they only have one, sometimes you'll have to force to play it when they only have 1 creature on the board and it's not worth popping it. It may be better as a lightning rod in those situations. I like this card a lot. I think the stats, it's well statted. It's good at trading with decent health creatures at the 1st level. You can usually catch a smaller creature on the 2nd level and get those nice upgrades. And by playing it the first 2 times, and as long as you have a spirit to work with, you don't have to have a whole lot of spirits in your deck to make the 3rd ability work. Especially if you have spirits in your deck that you want to be playing anyway, it's kind of trivial to get the 3 spirits in your banish pile to make the Caller Souls work. So yeah, this is an awesome card. I'm not unhappy to see this in my deck, provided I have the spirit support for it. But even if I don't, the first 2 levels, just to get to upgrade all those upgrades, is really nice. As you'll notice as we go through this, Nekrium took a little bit of a ding in its capacity to upgrade cards. I believe there's only 2 or 3 cards left that can upgrade cards in the set. So that upgrading has been kind of pushed more into Aloyan and Utera. So it's nice, this is one of the better options to see in terms of upgrade in Nekrium in the last winter. Next up, we have the Covetous Bloodlord. So this is a 3/2 vampire mage with stealth and the ability Activate. Give another one of your creatures -3 attack to give this +3 attack. That's what it is at level 1. At level 2, you got a 6/4 stealther. Activate to give another one of your creatures -3 attack. And this gains 6 attack. And then at level 3, it's a 9/5 stealth. Give another one of your creatures -3 attack to give this plus attack equal to that creature's attack. So this is a very weird card. You're taking a 7, 8, and 13 point stat penalty across the 3 levels. So it is pretty significant how understated this card is compared to what you get for just like a vanilla creature, even one that is even just like a basic stealth creature. Like a level 1 combat specter is a 5/5, right? So you're taking a pretty big penalty on this, especially to the health. So it's a bit tricky to use. It has an interesting ability where you can give one of your creatures minus attack to give it increased attack. So it does function more as an aggressive card. But in any sort of meta where there's removal or removal is prevalent, especially removal that's incidental, that can do 2 or 4 points of damage out of, on easily, it means that this is just gonna be a wasted action in a lot of cases, to be honest. You might be able to push through a little bit of damage, but it's gonna be very easy for your opponent to clean this up. I don't anticipate it staying out for more than 1 or 2 turns, so really using this activation ability multiple times is a bit of a big ask. Unless you have a lot of ways to protect it, I'm not a big fan of this card. The 3rd level is interesting, but it kind of creates this weird balancing act where you need a creature with high attack that you're okay giving a little bit of a stat debuff to in order to give this increased attack. And like if you have something that only has 3 attack and you activate this, you're not getting any attack out of the deal because it's going to decrease the attack before you get the increased attack on the Covetous Bloodlord. So you need a lot of things to go right for this card to work. It's definitely not a priority in my mind to level up or play, since it has such a low stat allocation to begin with. I think if it had a better health, it might have been more interesting, but the fact that you have to ding your own creature to get anything out of it, like even if you're chump blocking or your creature's going to die anyway, you're still losing that potential damage to the opposing creature in the process. I guess there's situations where you might be like about to sacrifice that creature to something else where you can use it. But again, it's going to take multiple activations just to overcome its stat penalty. And unless your deck is incredibly aggressive, it's going to be it's a weird sort of balancing act, and it's tugging in multiple directions. I just don't really like this card very much. But stealth and evasion is kind of the Nekrium Aloyan theme, so there's definitely places for this card, especially in sealed where removal may be pretty light. But otherwise, yeah, it's interesting. It's got a cute mechanic to it, but I just don't think it's a very strong card, and I don't really think it's going to be that strong in constructed play, especially when your opponent has one, especially in high level play where you have to have removal anyway. To really compete. This is just going to get knocked out really easily in the process. Next up, we have the Crypt Haunter. So this is a 1/1 spirit that reads, when this is destroyed, the enemy player destroys one of their creatures with decreased health. At level 2, it is the same ability. It's also still a 1/1. And at level 3, it's a 13/13 that brings back the level 1 and 2 versions of itself. So this is an interesting card. Things to note about it: 1, your opponent gets to choose which creature they're going to destroy. So it's not exactly like it's going to necessarily kill the opposing creature automatically just because like the common play planner would be to play this as a catcher and use it to catch a creature, do the 1 damage, and then hopefully they have to destroy that creature anyway. There may be situations where you can self-destruct this to finish something off, and it functions kind of like a pyre song. And what you're kind of doing is building up to that payoff of getting it back in the third cycle, and having a nice 13-13 body. You don't really get a stat penalty on you have a -1 to health on its third level. So you are going to either want to upgrade this to bypass the first 2 levels, or find a good situation where you can catch a creature and ensure that you're killing the right card. It's not going to be very good in against an opponent that has a lot of ways of buffing their creatures, especially buffing the creature's health, because the 1 damage is just not impactful enough to overcome that, and it's just going to be kind of a chump block in those situations. But it is a spirit, so it does help with spirit payoff cards, which there are quite a lot of in the Nekrium faction, as well as Utera, because that is the Nekrium Utera theme. But yeah, I think this is a situationally good card. One thing I've also noticed that from playing it is that often you get into a board state when you want to play the 3rd level, but you don't always have the lane space to reanimate both of the level 1 and 2 version. So you may not always get the most value out of this. So just be aware of that as well. Next up, we have the Darkshaper Savant. This is quite a fun reimagining of Set 1's Flameshaper Savant. So it is a 4/3 at level 1. Reads, when you it's a zombie mage, and when you play a level 1 card, you may give an enemy creature -1/-1. At level 2, it is a 7/6. Same ability. If you play a level 1 card, you get a -3/-3. And at level 3, you get a 12/10. Play a 1 card, give a creature -5/-5. So this card rewards you for underdropping cards as well as playing level 1 minion type cards. Is especially potent with a lot of the ways in Nekrium to make mindless zombies on the fly. In terms of stat penalty, you're getting a -5 stat penalty across all 3 levels. So it's not really that much under par for what it does. And usually, if you can play the first level, it may not survive for very long. But by the time you get to the 2nd level, even 1 trigger of it is making up for that stat penalty. Even though Flameshaper Savant can hit the opposing player, you'd be surprised how often the minus attack really matters with this. Usually with these Savant type cards, you want to be focusing on removing your opponent's creatures, because that's going to give you the most action advantage with your plays. So I do like the fact that it hits opposing creatures, and it can really mess with combat math. One way, a really common way I've found to play this is that if your opponent plays a mindless zombie, you play it in front of that mindless zombie. The next creature, level 1 creature you play, you can give that mindless zombie -1/-1. It catches it, and then you've got a 4/1 to stick around the next turn to keep on giving those minus stats. In SolForge Fusion, a lot of times you're talking about catching creatures and doing favorable trades where there's only 1 or 2 health left on the creature, and this is a great way of picking off those creatures. We talked about this in the Aloyn episode, I believe, but Drone Hive is an awesome pairing with this card. You can put this on top of a Drone Hive, and then whenever the Darkshaper Savant kills something, it brings out a gizmo, which then triggers the Darkshaper Savant again. If you can get into a board situation where your opponent has a lot of creatures that have just low enough health to be picked off by the Darkshaper, you can go into sort of this chain reaction where you're just machine gunning down your opponent's side of the board. So, very cool card. I think it's very strong, especially given how little the stat penalty is. But you do want to be mindful when you're playing with this card, and if you're prioritizing it, that you have good level 1 cards you can play in the later cycles. So creatures that are like Arrogant, or spells that can produce multiple minions, like Summoning Council or Infernal Ritual. Those type of cards where you can get multiple procs out of it. You're gonna want to prioritize not leveling those cards so that you can get the most bang for your buck with the Darkshaper Savant in the later levels. But yeah, very cool card. I like that it mirrors the Flameshaper Savant. It's a little more fair. It does only allow you to target enemy creatures, so it does sort of shut down certain infinite loops that you can't have it trigger. But with that, you get the nice benefit of really nerfing your opponent's attack and really changing combat math. Whereas with the Flameshaper Savant, often you're helping sort of finish off creatures, but you weren't really able to save your own creatures the same way Darkshaper can. So yeah, love this card. Definitely don't hesitate to play this card, and really utilize it, either in sealed or in constructed play. Next up, we have the Graveborn Caller. So this is a 2/5 spirit, stealth, and when this deals damage to an enemy player, you may play a mindless zombie minion. At level 2, you got a 4/7, still plays a mindless zombie when it hits, and then at level 3, it's a 5/10. You get a zombie brute out of it when it hits. So it doesn't do a lot of damage, and you do have to connect with it in order to get the creature out of it. In terms of stat penalty, you're looking at a -5, a -7, and then a -12 stat penalty. For the most part, you can make that up just by hitting your opponent once to get that extra minion. So, if you're on Forge when you're playing this card, it's a good way to just generate extra bodies. It can fuel your Dark Shaper Savant. I do like to kind of compare this a little bit to Metamind Overseer. You don't get like the gizmos that can buff up your creatures, but in terms of like the body you're getting the very similar stats on it. By the time you get to level 3, just getting that one brute out is good enough. And the fact that it can do it multiple times over several turns, your opponent does have to deal with this. They can't just keep ignoring it. Whereas something like the Metamind Overseer, or you just play it once and that they can ignore it from then. So yeah, it's a fine card. It's good in the stealth strategy. Good at sort of doing pick-off damage, but it's more about generating the minions than it is doing damage. It's just stealth is the vehicle for making that happen. And it's spirit, so it helps with those spirit synergies as well. Next up, we have the big bad of the set, the Hantu the Restless. So Hantu is a 4/5 spirit dragon, and it reads, when another one of your creatures is destroyed, reanimate that creature in that lane unless the enemy player takes 3 damage. Level 2, it is a 6/8. The reanimation requires 5 damage to prevent, and then at level 3, it is an 11/11. It takes 7 damage to prevent the reanimation. So you're getting a 3-point, 4-point, and 5-point stat penalty on Hantu across the 3 levels. It is very negligible for the amount of damage this card is going to do to your opponent. That said, it is still a creature. It is still subject to removal, but its spirit subtype is actually a pretty big advantage because there are a number of ways in the Last Winter to reanimate spirits specifically. So it is a threat. The damage adds up really quickly, but you want to also think about this in terms of it does give your opponent a choice. There are going to be situations where they might be willing to let you reanimate the creature. You can't really force lethal damage with this card necessarily. You can just put your opponent in a bad situation. So when you compare it to something like a Shambler, the Shambler is not optional, and the Shambler triggers off minions, whereas this does not. Minions can't be reanimated, so your opponent can ignore that. As of this recording, Hantu is a little bit confusing in the online app because you can't tell what's trying to be reanimated, so oftentimes you'll end up taking damage from minions incidentally, but that's really not how this card is meant to be played. Your opponent can ignore minions, and minions are very strong in a Shambler strategy. But its stats are really strong, especially given it has such a low penalty. Even like an 11/11 Hantu is still something that your opponent has to deal with, independent of that reanimation clause. It really puts your opponent in a tough situation, especially if you have high-value creatures to bring back. But it is subject to removal. A Dreadbolt, a Botanimate's going to take this out. Its toughness is going to be taken out by things like a Lightning Spark pretty easily, Disintegrate. There's a lot of cards that can take this out pre-combat, meaning that the reanimation clause, there's ways for your opponents to work around it. I'll put it that way. But it is, it's definitely the big bad of the set. It feels very unfair, but there are ways to work around it, and definitely play this card if you can, if you have it in your deck. But it's pretty insane. And next up, we have the Nirali Engulfer. So this is the first Nekrium card that uses the Exalted keyword and has activate, destroy a creature with 2 or less attack. It is an ooze. It's a 6/2 at level 1. At level 2, it's an 8/5. Activates to destroy a creature with 5 or less attack. Same exalted ability. And then at level 3, it's a 12/8. Destroys creatures with 7 or less attack. So this card's interesting. It's a common, so you'll see it pretty frequently. It's very fragile. You do have to get it into an exalt lane, but it can pick off minions pretty easily, especially the everything but I guess a mindless zombie at level 1. It's got a good attack stat, so worst case scenario in the first cycle, you can just throw this out to trade with something, and then by the time you get to the second level of it, and you actually have a number of exalts on the field in the second cycle, it's much easier to pick off creatures with this. I feel like the first level is kind of a throwaway. It's don't prioritize trying to get this to work on the first level, because there's going to be so few things that are going to be able to hit with 2 or less attack, and it's so easy to pick off by your opponent that I think it's great off Forge just trading with a creature, throw it in front of a Gloom Reaper Hag or whatever, take it out, not worry about it. But once you get to like the second cycle and you have some exalts that you've built up from the previous cycle, you can really get your opponent with this by getting it into the exalt lane, picking off an important utility creature, possibly a minion, and then just reactivating it over multiple turns if you can keep it on the board long enough. So yeah, Night Rolling Gopher, cool card. Definitely, any card that can kill multiple creatures over the course of several turns and negate multiple of your opponent's actions is always going to be strong. But the fact that you do have to jump through that exalted hoop does make it a little bit weaker. Stats aren't the worst. You're only going to a 4, 5, and 7 stat penalty, and if you can kill a creature even once or twice with this, I think it's more than made up for that penalty. So yeah, let's take a look at our legendary of the set. So in set 3, the last winter, we've got Fraud's Experiment number blank. So how does this card work? It evolves over multiple turns. So I'm going to show you Fraud's Experiment number 0147. So at level 1, it's a 5/6 with stealth. At level 2, it is a 6/9 with stealth, and it says if this deals damage to an enemy player, it deals 3 additional damage. And then at level 3, it is a 7/10. Stealth deals 3 additional damage to the enemy player when it hits them. And then it gains the activate, deal 2 damage to the enemy player, gain 2 life. So those two abilities synergize really well, especially with the stealth. So the guy can do a lot of damage, but that's just one version of it. As you can see with the artwork, it actually progresses. So in the first cycle, this guy has no arms. In the second cycle, he grows a crab arm. And in the third cycle, he grabs this tentacle arm. And each of those represents a different ability. If we look at different Fraud's Experiments, which I'm not going to go over in this video, they get different abilities. Sometimes it'll have Breakthrough or Aggressive. Sometimes it'll be able to activate to move an enemy creature from its lane to a different lane. Sometimes you gain extra life when it deals damage. It just has all different kinds of combinations. And the strength of the experiment is going to be wholly dependent on the version that you get. In terms of like the way the penalties work out with this, it does not grow very well. Like, you can have anywhere from a -9 to a -14 stat penalty by the time you get to level 3. So it really has to make up for it in whatever abilities you're getting to determine whether it's a strong experiment or not. But there's like over 400 combinations you can possibly get. For example, you might get, even if the order of the numbers determines like the order in which you're gonna get certain abilities. You could probably do a whole breakout video on this. I believe more than most got to do some tinfoil hat stuff with this to sort of explain how it works. I suggest you check out that video if you haven't before. But like, for example, you might get the activate ability at level 1 rather than the stealth ability. It just depends on your version. So it's a very cool card. It is a bit weaker depending on what sort of arrangement of stats you get in terms of how it grows and what your abilities you're getting. But I think it has a place. It's definitely it tends to be more geared towards aggression. But you can definitely get duds with this, or you can get like really cool ones. So I'm not unhappy to see this in my deck. I think it can be really cool. But as with all the legendaries that they've sort of done, like for the most part, legendaries tend to be unique, but not necessarily overpowered. And certain frauds experiments may feel a little bit overpowered, but I think their stat penalties tend to make up for it since they don't grow very well over the 3 cycles, and they're still subject to removal. So, very, very cool card, but it's going to really depend on the version that you get, how strong it's going to be. And it only you have to, the strength has to ramp up. It's not going to be very strong at level 1. You have to get these abilities, and by the time you get to level 3, hopefully get some good abilities that will interact with each other. So that's all the sort of like holistic non-forged creatures. Fraud is kind of in between a forged and a non-forged creature because of how it works. But let's talk about our forged base creatures, and let's talk about what's coming back. So we've got the Alluvian, the Banshee, the Butcher, the Creeper's back. We got Demon, Devourer, Drake, Geist, Moeba, Reaper, Revenant, Skeleton, Spirit, and the Summoner is back. With our new arrivals, our first is the Death Seeker. So here we have the Combat Death Seeker. Its deployability is if one of your creatures was destroyed this turn, give an enemy creature -3/-3. At level 2, it gives -4/-4. And then at level 5, it gives -5/-5. In terms of stats, you're getting a -3/-3, -6 penalty. Not a big penalty. More than makes up for it with the deploy trigger if you can get it to work. In terms of its stats, it scales much better than the Walker from the previous 2 sets, which has a similar ability but doesn't require the Death Clause. So Walker is a little bit more consistent in terms of a removal creature, like giving that debuff to your opponent's creature. But the Death Seeker can rumble on its own. Like, it's not taking much of a stat penalty. So even if you don't get to trigger it, it can still, put up a fight in combat. Again, just like any other forged creature, it's going to depend on what its adjective is and how it sort of works together. A cool one to get would be something like a Hematophagic Death Seeker, where you can sacrifice one of your own creatures as the first deploy, and then give an enemy creature minus attack on the second deploy, or minus attack and health on the second deploy. So good at picking off opposing creatures, messing up with combat math. And yeah, I like this deployability. It's a nice sort of substitute for Brood Scale, or Broodfang rather, that didn't come back. And still plays into that Nekrium Tempe's self-destruction sort of archetype for the last winter. Next up, we have the Dire Hound, which was one of my preview cards as well. In this case, we have it is a Beast Spirit, which is important because of those spirit synergies. It has you deploy, you may destroy another one of your creatures to play a mindless zombie minion. That's its level 1. At level 2, you get to destroy a creature to reanimate a level 1 creature. And at level 3, you get to destroy one of your creatures to reanimate a level 1 or 2 creature. In terms of stat penalty, you're looking at -4, -4, -6. So not much of a stat penalty. The Dire Hound is weighted towards attack, so it's good at trading up. And, the first level ability, just getting a mindless zombie is not always going to matter. It's nice for triggering death effects, but it really kind of shines when you get to level 2 and level 3, where you get to reanimate a creature. Notably, you can only level creatures that are lower level than it, so it is not really going to help you with any sort of infinite loop necessarily, at least not with itself. But one thing you got to bear in mind is that you kind of need to prioritize leveling this in the first cycle if you do draw it, because if you wait till too long, the reanimation becomes kind of irrelevant if you're not getting it on cycle. So there's definitely a lot of cool utility creatures you can bring back in the second cycle that are still relevant, especially ones that have strong deploy abilities or are part of sort of your engines, things like an Apocamancer or a Savant or something that you want to be using its ability even and not caring as much what level it is. This is really good at reanimating those kinds of targets. things like Lasher, if you have a good Lasher, using this as like a way of retriggering that kind of removal spell, or even like the Death Seeker is a great target to bring back. So yeah, it's cool to bring back like those lower level creatures that can have an impact on the board. The nice thing is, unlike Stitcher, it doesn't require it to be a minion that you're destroying, and you don't, like, with Stitcher, you had to replace a minion, and you had to put it in the lane the minion was in. Direhound, you destroy the creature, it doesn't matter if it's a minion or a regular creature, and you get to choose the lane that you're putting the new creature in. So this is also really good at being off Forge and blocking multiple lanes that your opponent, like, would ultimately think that they might be able to get through with multiple creatures. Suddenly you can get 2 blockers if you need to by destroying one of your creatures in an open lane to get that blocker in a vacant lane that your opponent thought they might be able to get through with. So a very cool card. I do like it a lot. It's nice that it's a common, so you'll get to see it quite a bit more than you saw the Stitcher, and it's a nice utility, but it's not overpowered. So definitely love the Direhound. Next up, we have the Maw. So here we have the Combat Maw. Its deployability is give the next creature an enemy player plays this turn -2/-2. So this is part of the Bartok cycle. This is Nekrium's version, which hurts your opponent's creature rather than buffing your own. Level 2, you get a -4/-4 penalty. It's 5/5 in this case, and then at level 3, it's a -8/-8 stat penalty. Or it's -8/-8 debuff to your opponent's creature. In terms of how it scales, you're getting a -4/-8 and then a -12 penalty on your stats from the Maw. But if you do hit your opponent's creature, it more than makes up for that penalty. Especially if it's a creature that your opponent's going to survive. If your opponent's going to play a creature that's still going to survive, it's -16 stats to that creature can really kind of negate it. It's especially potent on Forge if you play it as your first play, because inevitably your opponent is kind of going to need to play a creature. There are going to be situations where they can get away with just playing a couple spells, and in that case the Maw didn't do anything. But unlike Bartok, this is less committal. Like, you can just throw this out as your first play and you don't really care what your next play is going to be. Like, its effect is going to last for the rest of the turn. So whatever your opponent's next play is, the next creature coming out is going to get dinged. And it also kind of makes it awkward for your opponents in terms of sequencing their play, because they may have a creature that like a bigger creature or like a smaller creature that they want to play first, because they have a bigger creature they want to play second, but like this can kill that first creature. It's good at taking out mantises, that's for sure. So it makes it really awkward if your opponent's playing with a mantis, because it'll kill it before its deployability can be used. But yeah, I mean, this is going to really be very dependent on what your opponent's playing and the board state. But it's fine. Yeah, I mean, like, it's gonna be weaker if your opponent can play around it. It's telegraphing the play. But its stats, if you get the right combination of stats on it and the right modifier to it, it can be a pretty fine play, even if it's not going to be over the top. Definitely makes it difficult. It really does throw a wrench into what your opponent gets to do for their next play of the turn. Next up, we have the Combat Shard Witch, or Shard Witch rather, as our base creature. Its ability is just Exalted. It gets Stealth. Across the board, you're getting like a -1, -1, -2 stat penalty to it. It pretty much follows the progression of a Tactician. It's a little bit health heavy in terms of its abilities. So it's much bigger than you would expect for a stealth creature, but you do have to jump through that hoop of having it in an Exalt lane to get the stealth benefit. That said, stealth is not always going to be a benefit, so it's nice to have those extra stats, even if you don't get to play it in an Exalt lane. And it can be very potent depending on what the modifier you get for it. But not a lot to say about it. It just gives the creature... it's just, it's a stealth creature if you're Exalted. Otherwise, it's just kind of a stat stick. But it has a decent... Not much of a stat penalty, so depending on how it's been forged, your mileage may vary on the Shard Witch. Totally fine, not over the top, not super exciting, but not that bad either to see in your deck. And finally, for our Forge creatures, we have the Combat Terror, or rather the Terror. This one has the deployability. If you have a spirit in your banish pile, give one of your creatures +2 attack and +2 health. Level 2, you have to have 2 spirits in your banish pile, but you give +4/+4. And at level 3, you have to have 3 spirits, but you get +6/+6. So a few things to note about this. It does allow you to target itself. You can choose it itself for the bonus. So at level 1, like its stat penalty is -4, -6, -8. But if you can trigger it reliably, you're getting a 0 penalty. You're actually getting a bonus of 2 stats and a bonus of 4 stats by the time you do all the math on it. It's nice that you can either do it on itself or on a creature, on one of your other creatures. It kind of functions like roaring in that effect, only it's a little bit more flexible, at the cost of being a little bit more finicky to set up, because you do have to have those spirits to support it. And they have to be in your banish pile prior to playing it. If it's really important to get that buff, one thing you can do is throw this on top of one of your spirits to replace that spirit and make sure it's in your banish pile to make this spirit effect trigger. So yeah, Combat Terror, totally fine zombie mage, and yeah, don't mind seeing this if I have the spirit support. Alright, so now that we've gone through all of our base creatures, let's talk about our Forge modifiers. So these are the adjectives that modify our base creatures. What's returning? We've got Abyssal, Ardent, Arrogant, Combat, Devouring, Forsaken, Hematophagic, Hibernating, Horrific, Shambling is back, Stout, Vampiric, and Vile, the Reviled Vile. In terms of our new abilities, let's lead off with the Brood modifier. So I'm going to use the Tactician as my base creature. It is a little odd I am using the Betrayer, but this does help us sort of see how stats are being allocated. And in terms of what the Brood Tactician does, it says, deploy, you may give this -2 attack and -2 health to give another creature +2 attack and +2 health. For that ability, you're taking -1 stat penalty, and it is getting more health than attack. At level 2, it's -3, -3, and then +3/+3. Still just a -1 stat penalty, and then at level 3, it's -4, -4 to give +4/+4. I like this quite a bit. I think it's a lot more flexible than Roaring, which is a modifier in Utera, because you get the option, right? You don't have to take... You can leave... You can just play this for its stats if you don't have another creature on the board to give that stat bonus to. And the penalty you're taking it, you get to have the choice of whether you take the penalty or not, right? In terms of Roaring, you don't... the plus attack and plus health in Roaring is built into the stat penalty of the creature. So if you don't have a creature to buff, you're still taking the stat penalty on the Forged creature. So Brood is much more flexible. It's nice that it does, it's sort of heavier towards the health rather than the attack. So getting that Brood debuff, you can still play it, and then it's good to sort of use as a blocker and then use on a future turn for like replacing or destruction synergies. Having that health does make it a little bit more survivable. And yeah, I think Brood's a totally fine ability. It is a rare modifier, so you won't see it as often, but totally fine, very flexible, nice ability to see. It also sort of plays into the Tempest and Utera themes of the increased attack. So, you know, this has got a nice sort of like Venn diagram of how it can fit in with Last Winter synergies. Alright, next up we have Desecrating. So this is kind of like a Bone Reaver effect. It says, deploy, if you have one or more spirits in your banish pile, you may destroy a minion. At level 2, it's if you have 2 or more spirits in your banish pile, you may destroy a level 1 creature. And at level 3, if you have 3 or more spirits you get in your banish pile, destroy level 1 or 2. So it's always going to destroy something a little bit lower level than itself. And you do have to have the spirit support to make it work. But what you're getting is a -1, -3, -8 stat penalty. Not the biggest deal. especially if you can take out an enemy creature, because you can easily take out a creature that makes up for those stats. Any minion you take out is gonna more than make up for the -1 stat penalty. Just about any level 1 creature you take out is going to make up for the -3 stat penalty, and just about any level 1 or 2 creature you take out is going to make up for the -8 stat penalty. So, totally fine modifier. Very cool to go with something like the Terror, because the Terror gives a increased attack and health if you have 3 or more spirits in your banish pile. This one destroys a creature with 3 or more spirits, so they just work nicely together. So if you see one of those, definitely prioritize that in your Nekrium deck. Next up, we have the Haunting modifier. So Haunting just adds the Spirit subtype to the creature. At level 1, you're getting a -1 stat penalty to the health, and then no stat penalty on the next 2 levels. You just get basically the combat modifier out of Haunting. So you just take a little tiny stat penalty at the beginning, probably statistically insignificant, but you get the Spirit modifier to the creature to help enable spirit synergies in Nekrium and Utera. So it does count as a spirit in the banish pile. It can be affected by your spirit synergy cards that care about increasing or improving your spirits. I don't mind seeing this. Like, sometimes your creatures just need to be stat sticks, right? And the fact that it does not give really much of a penalty to stats means that you're not really paying much for getting this extra utility of it being a spirit. So yeah, very cool modifier. Not much to say about it. It's basically combat with a little bit of a different flavor to it. Next up, we have Malicious. So Malicious reads, at level 1, when this creature is destroyed, you may give a creature +2 attack. You're taking a 2-point stat penalty for that. At level 2, when the creature is destroyed, you give a creature +3 attack, taking a 3-point stat penalty. And then at level 3, you get a 4-point attack for destruction and a 4-point stat penalty. Yeah, so Malicious, I'm pretty down on this ability, to be honest. It's so negligible. Like, it does not scale very much over the course of the game. Like, 2, 3, and 4 seems like a pretty mediocre scaling. Like, I would have much rather seen something like 2, 4, 6 or 2, 5, 9 or something like that's significant in combat. It suffers kind of from the same thing that the Fiend did in sets 1 and 2, where by the time you're getting this bonus, like especially if you're like in a combat situation, the bonus doesn't matter as much. Like, what it's asking you to do is to like self-destruct that creature to give your creature a little extra attack in the process. To give another creature a little extra attack in the process. But that's a pretty big ask. Just the way it tends to play out in combat, I'd rather have just had those stats on the creature I played than to have to sort of line things up perfectly just to get some extra attack on a creature in a different lane. I'm just not big on Malicious. It's fine. It doesn't really give you a huge stat penalty, so if it's on a good creature, then it's not the worst. But again, it doesn't scale very much. I wish they had done more to scale it up a bit as it went by. Like, taking that penalty, like destroying one of your own creatures is a big cost, and letting it die in combat or to your opponent's removal spell, like the extra attack is easily negated if your opponent's killing this. And if it's in combat, it's often not going to give the attack bonus at a relevant point in time. So yeah, Malicious, it's okay. I'm not big on it. It's not the worst, but it's definitely not as bad as something like Vile. But yeah, not too excited to see this. It's common, so you're going to see it a lot. Hopefully you get it on a decent creature that can at least trade up in combat. Next up, we have the Spiteful modifier. So it reads, when this is destroyed, give the opposing creature -2/-2. For that, you are taking a 3-point stat penalty. Level 2, you give when this is destroyed, give the opposing creature -4/-4. Here we have a a 4-point stat penalty, and then at level 3 gives the opposing creature -6/-6 on destruction, and you are getting a 7-point stat penalty to the creature. So Spiteful is kind of a weird one. The easiest thing to compare this to is probably Horrific, which also cares about having an opposing creature. It scales better than Horrific, like it ramps up faster, but it's at an awkward point in time, right? So like, you can't really use this to pick off a creature, right? Like you put this in front of like so like you have say for example you have the 4/5 Spiteful Tactician, you put it in front of say like a 6/6, right? This may as well have just been a 6/6, right? Or whatever. At level 2 you put it across from what, like a 11 health creature. This may as well have just been a 4/7, right? Or sorry, a 11/7. Like, it doesn't, it's weird. Like, you have to care about the attack and the health for it to really make up for the stat penalty you're getting on it. Like, there are some weird cases where you can like play this and then destroy it to finish off one of your opponent's creatures, but like, it's not going to line up that often, and your opponent can play around it if you play this in an open lane. And I don't know, like, I question how often this is going to be relevant over just having like a combat creature or something like that, or an arrogant creature or something like that. I guess it's going to depend on what you get it on in terms of your what it's modifying, what the base creature is. But Spiteful, it's fine. Like, I think it's fine for sealed play. I'm sure it'll have its use cases and constructed as well. But overall, it's fine. I'd rather have Horrific, to be honest. Like, most often Horrific is just going to do more to affect the board state and sort of turn the tide for you. Because at least with Horrific, it's good at picking off creatures from previous combats or taking out minions. Whereas this, like, doesn't do any of that. It just has an understated body that's less of a threat for the potential to like give the opposing creature a little bit of stat negation that may or may not be relevant. So yeah, Spiteful, kind of whatever on it. It's not the worst, not the best. And then next up we have Stalking. So Stalking's a cool one. It gives a creature aggressive and stealth, and for that you're costing 3 stats, 4 stats, and then 8 stats over the course of its progression. Most of that stat negation's in the health, not in the attack, so it keeps it as a good pressure creature. And it's nice. It's good on Forge and it's good off Forge, right? Like, you can open lane it to take advantage of the aggressive clause if you're off Forge, and you can put it in front of a defending creature if you want to take advantage of the stealth aspect of it. So I like Stalking quite a bit, especially in aggressive decks, because it is good whether you're on or off Forge, right? For pushing through damage. Depending on what you get it on, it can push through a lot of damage before your opponent can deal with it. It's especially potent off Forge because you get to get that aggressive hit in, and the next turn you're going to be on Forge, so your opponent has to play a defender, or your opponent's most likely going to be playing in the back row, which means you're also going to get a stealth hit out of it. So definitely stronger off Forge, but definitely not bad on Forge either. Definitely plays into that Nekrium and Aloyan stealth evasion theme. So that concludes our creatures, and let's move on to our spells. Just like the other factions, we're only getting 5 spells back from the previous sets. Those spells are Blightskull Bomb, Circe's Call is back, Dreadbolt, Infernal Ritual, and Virix Embrace. But as always, we want to look at the new stuff. So we've got a lot of new stuff, including all new Exalts. The first of which is Corpus Cliffs. So this card is very interesting. It reads, deploy, you may destroy one of your cards to play a mindless zombie minion in this lane. And then it has a passive ability. At the start of combat, if one of your creatures was destroyed this turn, give your creature in this lane +4 attack. At level 2, it destroys your level 1 Corpus Cliffs, and you get to play a mindless zombie minion in this lane. You don't have to destroy another card. All you have to worry about is it'll just destroy your level 1 Corpus Cliff. And that start combat, if one of your cards was destroyed this turn, give your creature in this lane +7 attack. So first turn you play it, you're automatically going to get that buff because you will have destroyed your level 1 Corpus Cliff, assuming it's still out. And then level 3, it lets you play a mindless zombie, or rather a zombie brute minion, and you get to give the creature +10 attack in this lane. So, it's interesting. The first level is a bit of, it is a big lift, right? You do have to destroy a creature to get the minion. Otherwise, you're basically playing this as just like a +4 attack spell, assuming you had a creature be destroyed during the turn. Really, the best way to utilize this is you find another minion to just destroy and bring out the mindless zombie. My opinion on this is that it's getting the start is going to be a bit of a tempo hit, but once you get the first level, once you overcome the first level of it, the later levels are much easier to make work, and the body you're getting out of it is much more of a threat to your opponent, right? Like, on the level 2 version, you're getting a 10-3 zombie. Like, your opponent can't ignore that. Same thing with, like, a 16-6 zombie brute. Like, they just can't... They're going to have to spend an action to deal with this, right? They're going to have to put a minion out there. They're going to have to block it. They're going to have to use a removal spell on that creature. You're going to make up for the action once you get past that first level of it, right? And then it can keep on paying dividends in future terms if you have a lot of self-destruction synergies, or even exalts that destroy themselves, right? Like, if you have an energy exalt that destroys itself, it just cares about being a card. It doesn't have to be a creature. So you don't have to necessarily rely on your opponent destroying your creatures to make this work. And it makes that lane that it's in very threatening to your opponent, right? Like, they have to be careful about leaving that lane open, especially if you have a creature in the front row, because it can get out of hand very quickly. So I think it's an interesting card. I think it's going to be very dependent on the particular fuse you're playing with, whether this is a valuable play. I think it's a little bit of a gamble in sealed, because you may not be able to keep you may not be able to recover from the tempo loss of playing the first level of it. And if you like upgrade past the first level, it makes the second and third level that much harder to trigger. So be aware of that. It's not really one that you can skip. You do have to take that tempo hit to make it work. Next up, we have Dark Pryings. So this is a spell. It reads at level 1. Give one of your creatures +3 attack. If it is level 1, it gets stealth this turn. But wait, there's more. The next time it deals damage to an enemy player this turn, you may reanimate a level 1 creature. At level 2, you get +5 attack. It's still level gated for a level 1 or 2 creature, but you get to reanimate a level 1 or 2 creature. Level 3, it's +7 attack. No matter what level the creature is, it gets stealth. And then you get to reanimate any creature upon damaging your opponent with it. This is a very cool card. I like this a lot. It is especially potent with abilities like by playing on a creature that has a damaging ability, like for example, like a Sparking Omni or a Dark Card Sorcerer. I guess you'd have to have a Betrayer to make that work, but any creature that can deal direct damage to your opponent, you can get this to instantly trigger and get that reanimation off. So not only have you buffed your creature, given it evasion for the turn to possibly get through for extra damage and protect it, and get to reanimate a creature out of it, right? So if you can pull this off, it is a very, very strong play. That said, I play with it enough to know that it's kind of difficult to get to line up in the first cycle. So you're almost always going to be underdropping this. It's an incredibly risky play if you're on Forge and you're playing it on a creature that doesn't have a way to immediately trigger it, like I said, like a Sparking Omni or a Flameshiver Savant or something like that. Because if your opponent can remove that creature before it deals damage, you're really gonna be penalized. Like, that's really gonna hurt you in terms of your action equity. Or if they have like an aggressive creature that they can throw out in front of it. So it's ideal to play this off for like it's most. The best time to play this card is off Forge, or if you have a creature that can immediately trigger it. It's a very risky play to play it on Forge, and just to kind of cross your fingers that you can get through. But if your opponent's light on removal and doesn't have those aggressive creatures or ways to like mobility creatures in front of your front row creature, then yeah, this thing can really turn the tide and bring back a very high priority threat from your banished pile. And I do like this sort of way that they are sort of level gating some of these abilities, like with the stealth, like you can't give a high level creature the stealth, like, and just use this as a way to push through like a level 3 Phoenix. You have to go through the work to give that stealth bonus. So yeah, cool card. I like the design space. I'm very happy to see this in my deck, but I play with it enough to know that it is situational. It's not always going to work, and the best way to utilize it is to have creatures in your deck that can deal direct damage to your opponent. Next up, we have Explosive Demise. So this reads, destroy one of your creatures to give each enemy creature -2/-2. Level 2, you destroy one of your creatures to give each enemy creature -4/-4. And then at level 3, it's -8/-8 for destroying one of your creatures. I like to think of this as a sort of an upgraded version of Epidemic. Epidemic didn't require you to destroy one of your creatures to play it, but it affected both sides of the board, right? So this scales very similar to Epidemic, but you only have to lose one creature at most. I found that just the way the games tend to play out, if you're epidemicing, there's a very high probability that you're going to have to kill one of your own creatures anyway. So this is really good at preventing, like, at not kind of screwing over your own board state just to sort of, do a one-sided board wipe or board debuff. It's especially good at like messing with combat math because it does give that minus to the attack. It's not just like a firestorm effect, right? So if you can have a good minion generation in your deck, especially, then I think Explosive Demise is a really good role player to really debuff your opponent's team and not have too much of a penalty to yourself. Grave Pact did not come back, so this is sort of taking its place as a destruction enabler and a way to sort of one-side board wiper, really do that sort of one-sided negation. Like this level 3 version of it can really be backbreaking for your opponent. So yeah, this was a nice new card. Moving on, we've got the Forsaken Mausoleum. So this is another Exalt. It has deploy, deal 2 damage to a creature to gain 2 health. And it reads, when one of your spirits comes into play in this lane, you may deal 2 damage to a creature and gain 2 health, then destroy the Mausoleum. Level 2, the damage and health changes to 4 for both abilities. And then at level 3, it is a 6 damage for 6 damage life drain effect for both sides of it. So this is a fine card. The level 1 is basically just a way to sort of pick off a minion or a damaged creature and then have this sort of like lying in wait ability to throw a spirit on top of it to pick off another creature. By the time you get to level 2, though, the amount of damage is significant enough to take out a legitimate creature, especially in one turn. Like Vyric's Embrace, its scaling is 4, 6, and then 8, and this is basically 4, then 8, then I guess 12. So it scales much better than Vyric's Embrace does if you can trigger it with the spirit in the same turn. But you have that sort of flexibility of triggering it over multiple turns. You can have it enable exalted synergies. So yeah, I mean it's low impact at the first level. You kind of have to find the right opportunity to play it, but those little like sort of life gain payoffs, and it just has a lot of like neat little interactions that sort of add up. It's sort of one of those like the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts kind of idea. So yeah, Forsaken Mausoleum, very cool. Also really cool artwork. This giant sort of wolf demon coming out to this really tiny guy in the front. So yeah, very cool card. Next up, we have the Hungering Strike. So this reads, you may give a creature +3 attack. You may give an enemy creature -3 health. Then it goes up to 5 and 5 and 8 and 8. So you're basically draining something's health to give another creature attack. This is fine. It can be low impact or it can be high impact. The sort of the best case with this is that you get to pick off an enemy creature, like either finish it off and then buff one of your creatures to trade favorably in combat or push in a little extra damage. You can also use it as a way to sort of enable some of those attack synergies in Tempest and Utera. Though it's not really the focus of the card. I think, it's a nice sort of like toxic spores effect, but you get to give attack instead of health as part of the exchange. So, yeah, I mean, fairly simple effect, nice common. You're rarely going to pick off a full creature off this. It's usually going to have to either be like a minion or just finishing something off that was previously damaged. But yeah, fine common card, good and sealed. Has its place in constructed at the right time, but yeah. Let's move on to Immortal Echoes. So this reads: upgrade a 1 card in your discard pile. You may give a creature -2/-2. If this destroys it, you may upgrade a 1 card in your discarded pile. So this has the potential to upgrade multiple cards in a turn if you can destroy something with it, kind of like an Om Nom Nom effect. At level 2, you get to upgrade any card, and then you give a -5/-5 to a creature, upgrade a card. And then at level 3, you get to upgrade a card twice, and then you give a creature -8/-8, and if it kills it, you get to play a card in your discard pile for free. So it almost acts kind of like an army commander if you can kill a creature. So a couple things to note. One, it doesn't have to be an enemy creature. You can kill one of your own minions to get that extra effect. At the first couple levels, you're going to be taking a bit of a tempo loss to do that, but at level 3, you may find that it is fine to kill your own creature just to get that awesome army commander effect out of it. The scaling is pretty much in line with Om Nom Nom and Devour Soul. You're just getting sort of a different benefit from it. So I really like this continuation of that space, that Nekrium, that sort of identity in Nekrium, where you're destroying or you're giving penalties to creatures, and if you kill them with that penalty, you get a really cool effect as a result. Definitely like Immortal Echoes. I'm not unhappy to see it, but at the same time, it does suffer from sort of that Lyria effect, where if you get the first level version of it on the first turn of the first cycle, or even really the first turn of any cycle, you're not going to be able to utilize it very well. Because there's nothing, like, maybe you can give a little bit of a debuff to a creature, but that upgrade ability gets left kind of on the table at that point. Next up, we have Restless Dead. So this reads: choose one, play a zombie brute minion, or reanimate a level 1 spirit. Level 2, it's still, you get the 1 zombie brute, or you get a 1 or 2 spirit, and at level 3, you get a zombie brute or any spirit. So basically, the zombie brute is just there as sort of a fail case, so that if you don't have a spirit to reanimate, you can still play it. That's most likely going to be sort of the case for the level 1 version. If you just want to kind of upgrade it in the first cycle, zombie brute is totally fine. Otherwise, getting back your Hunt 2 is a nice effect for this card. A lot of times your reanimation target, since it's on curve, it's on cycle for the level of the card you get to bring back, it's totally fine as sort of getting sort of a double dip on any sort of spirit you have in your discard pile, or rather your banish pile. Totally fine, don't mind seeing this, especially if I have high value spirit targets. Otherwise, it's kind of a little lackluster if all of the spirits that you're playing with are not really ones you want to prioritize anyway. So, yeah, it could be a good card, or it could be kind of a dead card in your deck, depending on what you roll. All right, next up we have the River of Souls. So this is a spell exalt. It reads: deploy. Put 2 energy counters on this. So this is our energy counter, first energy counter card for Nekrium. It reads: activate, remove an energy counter from this to play a mindless zombie minion in the lane, and then if there's no energy, you destroy it. Level 2, you get 2 energy again, but you get to reanimate a level 1 creature. And then at level 3, same, you get 2 energy, and you get to reanimate a level 1 or 2 creature at that point. So you can never reanimate a level 3 creature with this, but otherwise, this card is absolutely insane. If you play it right. There are wrong ways to play this card, but I may talk about this more in depth in a breakout episode. But what you're getting is at level 1, you're getting 2 mindless zombies for 1 action, right? They're staggered over multiple turns, but you get to time when you get those zombies. Oftentimes, it's correct just to play this out and not even activate it until much later in the cycle, or even the following cycle. It pairs especially well with Dark Shaper Savant. I always like to see this in a deck with Dark Shaper Savant, because you can just drop this on the board and not even activate it until the cycle, and you have that level 2 Dark Shaper Savant, and you just have these ready to go, right? You just start pumping out the mindless zombies, and you're getting all these extra Dark Shaper Savant triggers out of it. And then let's just kind of look at the math of it, right? So at level 2, you get to reanimate 2 level 1 creatures, right? And if we go back to sort of our model of how stats progress with the 12, 18, 27, right? 12 times 2 is 24. You're getting more than a level 2's worth of stats by the time you've got those 2 creatures back. And especially if they have an important deploy ability or they're like a utility creature, you can get some pretty good creatures back out of this, even if they are level 1. Same thing for level 2, or sorry, the level 3 version when you're getting a level 2 creature back. 18 times the 36 stats, whereas we normally get 27 stats out of a level 3 card. So, like, the versatility of this card is absolutely insane. And timing, the fact that you get to time when you bring that creature back, like, I cannot stress enough how powerful it is that you can choose when to activate this ability. It's akin to like a Forgeborn ability where you get to choose when to time that ability, right? This just sits out until you're ready to use it. It's always threatening, and it has a lot of different combo potential. So, yeah, River of Souls, it's amazing. Now, one other thing to kind of note about it, though, is that if you miss it in the first cycle, it can be very hard to make it work starting in cycle 2 and beyond. At that point, it tends to fall off. So I absolutely prioritize playing this card in cycle 1 if I draw it. If I don't draw it in the first cycle, there's a very high probability that it may not be worth it to play in the second cycle and beyond. So bear that in mind. Like, it is not, it's really, really strong, but it's not like the end all be all. But even by the time, even getting the level 3 version in cycle 4 can still do a lot of damage on the board. So yeah, River of Souls is a phenomenal card. Another thing to note with this too is it synergizes with energizing creatures. So we talked about that in Tempe's. Energizing lets you put energy counters on an Exalt, and that's the same thing at all 3 levels. So if you have a level 1 energizing creature in your banish pile, you can just keep bringing it back into the River of Souls lane over and over again, because you're always going to have at least 1 energy counter on the River of Souls, provided you don't use the last counter on it to bring back that energizing creature in the first place, right? So you have to have 2 energy counters on it when you start the reanimation, but then you end up with 2 after the reanimation. So that can be very cool. You basically have completely locked out a lane unless the opponent has something to remove the Exalt. So yeah, very cool with energizing creatures. Very powerful card. Do not underestimate this, and I would absolutely prioritize this any chance you get. All right, next up, we've got the Sacrifice Chamber. This is an Exalt. It reads, your creature in this lane has Slay. Deal 3 damage to the enemy player and gain 3 health. Level 2, you destroy the level 1 version, but you get to give a creature +3 attack, and the Slay becomes a 5-point drain. And then at level 3, we've got, it destroys the earlier versions. You give +5 attack to one of your creatures, and the Slay becomes 7 drain. So this card can be an absolute back-breaking card in the right deck, but you have to bear in mind that there is going to be a bit of a tempo loss the first time you play it. And hopefully you can make up for that, because all it's doing is damage and gaining health. So it doesn't really help your board position when you first play it, but you can really drain a lot of health from your opponent when you combine it with the right cards. For example, if you put it with like a shard back, like especially a Furious shard back, you can take out multiple creatures in a turn, and that's going to cause the Slay to activate multiple times. It'll work with Blizzard Shaman. Any kind of creature that can be used to destroy multiple creatures in a turn is going to really cause this to skyrocket in terms of like whether it's an important play in your deck or not. Another thing to note about it is that it goes absolutely insane with Grimgaunt Predator. So the Grimgaunt Predator, it's a card that's been around since the beginning of the game. It's a stealther that when it damages your opponent, you get to destroy a level-gated creature. The nice thing about this is that the Slay also deals damage, and the Grimgaunt Predator does not need to be combat damage, right? So if you slay a creature with the Grimgaunt Predator while it's in the Sacrifice Chamber lane, you start a chain reaction where you get to slay all of those creatures over and over again of your opponents and keep gaining life and dealing damage. So by the time your Grimgaunt Predator is level 3, even with a level 1 Sacrifice Chamber, you can annihilate your opponent's board in one fell swoop, assuming you can get it started. It's especially devastating if you play... So especially a good way to set this up too is to play the Sacrifice Chamber in a lane where you can... for example, like say your opponent has a Wisp on the board, you could put this in the Wisp lane and then catch the Wisp with your Grimgaunt Predator to start the chain reaction. So it's especially potent off-forge with the Grimgaunt Predator if you can set up the right block to take out a creature and then start the chain reaction. You're going to take a hit because you're going to probably have a lot of open lane stuff from your opponent when you set things up that way, but you'll gain that life back from this Slay trigger. So very cool combo card with Grimgaunt Predator. So if you see those two cards in the same deck, definitely prioritize trying to get that to work because it's a lot of fun, even if it's not always the most powerful thing. It's very, like, I'll be honest, I've tried it a few times. It does not line up as much as you'd like it to, but it's really fun when it does, when you are successful with it. So Sacrifice Chamber is the last of our spells. In terms of our Soulbinds, we have a few coming back. The two that come back are Chanting of the Abyss and Necrolord Yorick. So Necrolord Yorick is a pretty cool one to come back. I'm not a big fan of Chanting of the Abyss and Muthrol. It's big and splashy, but it has not really seen much of an impact in any sort of constructed play, and it's such a long game card that I don't know. It's fun. They tried to pick fun creatures to bring back rather than the most powerful ones. I definitely would have rather seen something like Cerazal come back, but that's just me. I even like Devour Soul, but Immortal Echoes is kind of playing in that space. So I think Necrolord Yorick's fine. Not the biggest fan of Chanting the Abyss, but let's talk about the new ones that we've got. So the first one is Conscript the Dead. So this reads, play Ruthless Wanderers, then you may destroy one of your creatures to give a creature -3/-3. So let's see what Ruthless Wanderers is. It is a 1/5 Spirit Warrior with a lot of text. It reads, when another one of your non-minion creatures are destroyed before combat, you may play a mindless zombie minion in its lane. And then it has the activate ability, if you have 3 or more minions in play, transform Ruthless Wanderers. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But when you play the Conscript the Dead, you get the Ruthless Wanderers, you destroy one of your creatures, give your opponent's creature -3/-3, and then you get a mindless zombie out of the deal, assuming you didn't destroy a minion. When you transform this, you get Ruthless Army, which is a 6/6 with stealth. And when this is transformed, give your minions +3 attack. So it's kind of a minions payoff card. So in theory, what you can do is, you know, set up a bunch of out-of-combat destructions to get, like, so what this card's telling you to do is set up a bunch of out-of-combat destructions to get a bunch of minions, flip the army into the Ruthless Army, and then try and hit for a bunch with a bunch of minions. At level 2 for Conscript the Dead, you get to play the Ruthless Wanderers. The destruction gives you a -5/-5. But at level 3, it kind of falls apart. So it reads, you may destroy one of your creatures to give a creature -8/-8. So it does that before the playing of Ruthless Army. And then it says, either transform Ruthless Wanderers, otherwise play Ruthless Army. So this is incredibly awkward, okay? Because by the time the level 3 version is incredibly awkward. I think it's really poorly designed, to be honest. because it relies on you having the Ruthless Wanderer survive until you can play the level 3 version of the card, right? Because Ruthless Army does not trigger when it's played. It only triggers when it's transformed. So you don't get the benefit of buffing the minions when you play it. You're just getting a 6/6 stealther, which is not that impressive at level 3. You don't... If you destroyed one of your creatures without the Ruthless Army on the board, you don't get the minion rebate back. So I think this card is probably fine in the first and second cycle, especially if you have minion support to try and like power it out to the Ruthless Army version. But I think this card just completely falls apart at the third level because it does not synergize with itself. It just doesn't make any sense. It should have just said, play Ruthless Wanderers, destroy one of your creatures to give a creature -8/-8, and then you may transform Ruthless Wanderers or something like that. Like, it shouldn't have had you play it directly as the Ruthless Army. It just doesn't make sense to me. That, or they needed the Ruthless Army to say when this is transformed or played, give your minions +3 attack. Like, it's just awkward. I don't like the design of it. I think it's kind of like neat, but I think the landing kind of fails on it. I think the level 3 really rubs me the wrong way, to be honest. It just doesn't make any sense. It's asking you to keep this 1/5 creature alive till you happen to draw the level 3 Conscript the Dead to make it actually pay off in the way it's sort of designed to. Like, I just don't like it. So I'm kind of disappointed in the Soulbind. I think that they could have done a little bit better with how they designed the third level of the card, even if it was a little bit more, even if it had to be a little bit more awkward in the way it was worded. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about Conscript the Dead. Let's move on to our final Soulbind. And with that, we get Corpse Host. So this is a 3/3 Spirit Zombie, so get yay Spirit synergies. And when you play it, you play Necrolab. So let's look at that. It is an exalt that reads, when your creature in this lane is dealt damage, put an energy counter on this. And then it also reads, do not remove energy counters from this when it transforms. Alright, so you do not remove the energy counters from this when it transforms. Let's look at how we transform it. So at level 1, Corpse Host, you got the 3/3. At level 2, you get a 5/5. And it reads, deploy, deal 3 damage to another one of your creatures to give this +3 health. So I guess the idea is you deal damage to the creature in the Necrolab lane to give it some extra health. So you're not like losing too much in stats by doing that. And you get some energy counters. And at level 3, you deal 5 damage to another one of your creatures to give this +5, then transform Necrolab. What does it become? It becomes the Necro Tower. So it says, activate. Remove any number of energy counters from this to destroy a creature with a level lower than the number of energy counters removed. So you can remove 2 energy counters to destroy level 1, 3 energy counters to destroy level 2, and 4 energy counters to destroy a level 3. So Corpse Host is kind of like gives you this quest to put a bunch of energy counters on your Necrolab and then get this cool payoff where you start destroying creatures in the third cycle. The body on this is kind of weak. You get a -6, -8, and -11 stat penalty to it. It is a bit fiddly. You have to kind of set it up where you get a creature in your Necro Tower lane, or sorry, your Necrolab lane, and then the Corpse Host hits it, and then you get to transform it. So you got a lot of setup to make this work. But I'm not going to lie, the Necro Tower does seem pretty potent. I mean, by the time you've transformed this, you're probably going to have at least like 4 or 5 counters on it. Maybe you get to destroy a level 1 and a level 2 creature over a couple turns, or maybe even a level 3 creature, which is enough to kind of make up for those stat penalties of the Corpse Hosts. But that said, like, it doesn't do a whole lot. It doesn't really do anything until you get that level 3 Corpse Host, which means you're relying on getting the Corpse Host all 3, like drawing all 3 versions of it, right? So any card that requires you to really get all 3 levels of it to really get the benefit out of it, is I'm a bit skeptical of. I think it's a fun card. I don't necessarily think it's a good card. I think it's a little bit too inconsistent and takes too much setup to get your payoff of the Necro Lab, or sorry, the Necro Tower. But I mean, I guess if you have like some energizing creatures and you pair this with a Tempest half, and Tempest has a bunch of self-damaging things, so you could really charge this up in that archetype. But you still have to draw that level. You still have to draw that level 3 corpse host to transform it. I believe you have to have a creature in another lane. Well, no, I guess you don't have to have a creature in the lane to transform it. It's a little confusing whether you have to have a creature in the lane or not to transform it. I'll have to double check with Nick on that. But either way, like to really get the max benefit out of it, you have to get that level 3 version of the corpse host, or else you really have spent a lot of energy kind of charging up this Necro Lab that never transforms before the game ends. So bear that in mind. But yeah, that is our look at Nekrium. So I thought Nekrium did pretty well in this set. It's got some real bangers, like Hantu and River of Souls. Like, there's some really good reanimation stuff going on. It really plays into sort of the Nekrium reanimation identity in this set. It scales back a little bit of its upgrade synergy. And then we'll get to talk about in the future episode about some of the Cersei and Nyx abilities that got added. So I think Nekrium got a lot of good boosts in this set. So yeah, I like it. Hopefully this will spark a bit of discussion. Please leave a comment. I'd love to hear your opinions. Maybe I got some stuff wrong. Maybe you agree with me on some of these things. Again, I have not played with all of these cards, so some of the things that I think are kind of weak may be more powerful than I give them credit for. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it. Again, if you like this content, give it a like and a subscribe so I know you're enjoying it. And I will catch you guys for the next episode of Metasight.